David Carter never imagined that one small act of kindness would drag him into a battle against a man who thought the world belonged to him. It all began at 2 in the morning. Driving home through heavy rain, David spotted a young woman walking barefoot on the highway, her elaborate wedding dress soaked and clinging to her body. She looked broken, exhausted, her eyes red from hours of crying. "Please, help me," she whispered as he rolled down the window. "I have nowhere to go." David, a 42-year-old mechanic who had fought his own battles with injustice, recognized that look of desperation. He had seen it in the mirror years ago after losing his job at the local repair shop to discrimination. He had rebuilt his life with his own hands, brick by brick, customer by customer. And now this stranger needed help. Her name was Isabella. She had run away from her wedding just hours earlier, leaving behind wealth, status, and a fiancé who wasn't just controlling, he was dangerous. That fiancé was Richard Blackwood, heir to a real estate empire and a man accustomed to buying or crushing anything in his way. David offered her his couch for the night, though unease kept him awake. Something told him this wasn't just a story about cold feet. Rich women didn't flee luxury weddings in the middle of the night, unless the truth was far darker. His instincts proved right the next morning. A black BMW pulled up outside his modest home, and 3 men in suits stepped out. They didn't bother knocking, just walked straight in. "Where's the boss's bride?" the scar-faced one demanded. David stood firm. "I don't know what bride you're talking about." The men smirked, making a call on speakerphone. A chilling voice came through. Richard Blackwood himself. His threats rolled out with the arrogance of someone certain that money and power could bend anyone to his will. But David Carter wasn't anyone. He was a man who had been underestimated his whole life, and survived because of it. When the thugs finally left, promising to return, Isabella tried to apologize and offered to leave to keep him safe. David shook his head. "Number, you stay. If he wants something, he'll have to come through me first." David had learned patience and strategy from years of struggle, while Richard Blackwood had only learned how to intimidate. That imbalance was about to spark a clash neither man had expected. If you're enjoying this story of resilience and quiet strength, make sure to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments, because what David discovers next about his powerful rival will flip the game completely. 3 days later, the fight escalated. David arrived at his workshop to find 2 police cars waiting, a search warrant in hand. Richard Blackwood wasn't just coming back, he was coming with every weapon money could buy. "We've received an anonymous tip about stolen auto parts being sold here," Detective Morrison announced, though his tone betrayed his doubt. "We'll need to search the premises." David stood silently, arms crossed, as strangers combed through the workshop he had built with his own hands. He already knew exactly who had orchestrated this charade, but arguing would only play into the prejudices Morrison already carried. Halfway through the search, David's phone buzzed, a private number. "Did you enjoy the show, David?" Richard's voice was smooth, almost gentle. "That was just the warm-up. You have 24 hours to return what's mine." "Isabella isn't anyone's property," David said firmly. Richard chuckled. "Ah, but you're mistaken. When someone invests $300,000 in a wedding, that bride becomes an asset, and I always protect my assets." The line went dead. David slipped the phone back into his pocket, his jaw tight. The officers eventually left empty-handed, Morrison mumbling an embarrassed apology. When the workshop door finally shut behind them, David sat in his office chair, thinking. This wasn't the first time he had felt the system trying to break him. He remembered Detroit in the 1980s, when just being a smart black teenager made you a suspect for anything that went wrong in the neighborhood. His father, Samuel Carter, had worked at Ford for decades until a so-called restructuring laid off older black workers like him. David could still hear his father's words. "Son, they'll try to break you every way they can. Your strength isn't in fighting like they do. it's in being smarter. The pressure mounted quickly. By Tuesday, 3 regular clients had canceled their appointments, each with the same vague excuse. David didn't need to guess who had spooked them. That afternoon, Isabella arrived at the shop carrying 2 coffees, her face clouded with worry. "David, maybe I should leave. I don't want you to lose your business because of me." He took the cup, studying her. For the past few days, she'd been helping with his paperwork, showing a sharp mind for numbers that didn't match the trophy bride image Richard had likely crafted for her. "Tell me about him," David asked. Isabella sat down, her gaze fixed on the workshop's grimy window. "Richard controls everything through money. At first, I thought he was generous, paying for my apartment, my car, my bills, but every gift had strings attached. When I started questioning him, he cut off my credit cards and called it teaching me priorities." She gave a bitter laugh. "But what terrified me wasn't how he treated me. It was how he treated everyone else. Waiters, employees, anyone he couldn't buy. He talked about people like you, David, as if you were problems to be managed, not human beings." By Wednesday, the attack escalated again. When David pulled up to the workshop, he found the building's landlord, Mr. Williams, standing there with 2 men in suits. "David, we need to talk about the lease," Williams said, avoiding his eyes. "I've received a very generous offer for this building. I'll need you out by the end of the month." One of the men stepped forward, slipping a business card into David's hand. "Blackwood Properties." "How much did he offer you?" David asked quietly. "Double the market rate," Williams muttered. I couldn't turn it down." After they left, David sat at his desk and considered the pattern. Richard was executing a classic strategy: destroy his reputation, drive away his clients, and take away his livelihood. He had seen corporations do the same thing to small Black-owned businesses for decades. But Richard had underestimated him. David Carter wasn't just another obstacle. He was a man who had spent his life studying exactly how men like Richard operated, and more importantly, a man who documented everything. That night, while Isabella slept on the couch, David powered up his computer. He began digging into Richard Blackwood's past. The deeper he looked, the darker it got. Shady government contracts in the 1960s, land deals that smelled like fraud, a fortune built not on brilliance, but on corruption. David opened a folder he had been saving for years, and for the first time since this battle began, he allowed himself a small smile. Richard Blackwood had money and power, but David Carter had something far more dangerous: the truth. For 3 days, David had quietly documented everything. Every unfamiliar car parked outside, every strange phone call, every veiled threat. He even kept the business card from Blackwood Properties. Richard thought he was hunting down a frightened mechanic. In truth, he was dealing with a man who had grown up knowing survival meant staying 3 steps ahead of predators. Thursday brought the inevitable escalation. David was working under a car when he heard footsteps and familiar voices. Crawling out, he saw Richard's henchmen, but this time, they weren't alone. Richard Blackwood had come in person, tall, immaculate suit, that smug confidence of someone born into power. "So, you're the brave mechanic," Richard said coldly. No handshake, no courtesy. His eyes slid past David. "Isabella, darling, you've played long enough. Time to come home." The office door creaked open. Isabella appeared but didn't move toward him. Instead, she stepped closer to David. "This is my home now," she said firmly. Richard's mouth curled into a smirk. "Don't be absurd. Look at this place. You belong in mansions, not grease-stained garages. And you," David finally spoke, "were born thinking you could own people." Richard studied him as though he were an insect pinned under glass. "You really believe you can stand against me? I crush entire companies before breakfast. Do you think this rundown shop is a challenge?" Each word dripped with contempt. But instead of breaking David, it strengthened him. Every insult, every threat only fueled the quiet determination inside him, a strength Richard couldn't see. What the millionaire didn't know was that David Carter had spent a lifetime learning patience, and men like Richard always underestimated the people they called inferior. Richard believed the police raid, the lost clients, and the eviction notice were victories. But David was playing a different game. Friday morning, the phone rang. "Mr. Carter, this is Marcus Washington, Internal Revenue Service Investigation Division. We need to talk." David almost laughed. First the local police, then the landlord, now federal agencies. Richard's war was escalating. But when Agent Washington arrived an hour later, David noticed something different. The man was in his 50s, weary but sharp, his eyes scanning the workshop with respect. He asked to see 3 years of accounting records. David handed them over without hesitation. Transparency had always been his shield. As Washington flipped through the files, Isabella quietly placed 2 cups of coffee on the desk. The agent's brow furrowed. "Curious. This is the 3rd time this month I've been sent to investigate black business owners over anonymous tax complaints, and they all came from the same law firm, Blackwood and Associates." David froze. Washington met his eyes. "Your records are spotless, but let me give you some advice. Men like Blackwood don't stop here." After Washington left, silence lingered in the office. Isabella sat by the window, uncharacteristically quiet. "There's something you haven't told me," David said, not as a question, but as a statement. She exhaled slowly. "When we were together, Richard used to show me things, documents, recordings. He wanted me to understand how he really controlled the city. Payoffs to officials for permits, threats against small property owners, money laundering through fake construction deals." David leaned forward. "Do you still have proof?" Isabella hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "I photographed everything. I kept it, in case I ever needed it." David's pulse quickened. For the first time, he realized Richard Blackwood wasn't just attacking a mechanic. He was leaving behind evidence of crimes that could bring down an empire. For 2 straight hours, David studied the files on Isabella's phone. Dozens of photos, spreadsheets of illicit payments, signed contracts that reeked of fraud, and even messages tying Richard to local officials. David closed the phone gently and looked at her. "You weren't just running from a marriage, Isabella. You were running from a criminal empire." That afternoon, David made a call he'd been holding back for days. Tomas Rivera, Tribune Journal. On the other end, an old familiar voice answered with surprise. "David Carter? I can't believe it. Long time, brother." "Tomas, I need to see you. I've got a story you'll want." They met at a downtown cafe. David slid a folder across the table. Inside, photographs of the enforcers, recordings of Richard's threats, paperwork on the forced property buyout, and Isabella's cache of evidence. Thomas flipped through it all, his eyes widening. "My God, this is dynamite. We've suspected Blackwood for years, but we never had proof. With this, I can connect everything we've been digging at for months." He held up a photo of Richard, handing an envelope to a councilman. "This man greenlit 3 of Blackwood's illegal projects. This is the missing link." David leaned in. "How long until you can publish?" "A week, 2 if we want it airtight." Tomas's expression grew serious. "But you need to understand, once this goes public, Blackwood will throw everything he has at you. Lawyers, politicians, worse." David nodded. "Then make sure the story can't be broken." Over the weekend, David worked with a focus sharper than ever. Every repair, every customer was handled like a man who knew eyes were on him. And he was right. Richard surely had informants watching. Monday morning, another blow landed. A subpoena was taped to his door, a lawsuit accusing him of interfering with a contractual relationship and alienation of affection, demanding $200,000 in damages. Isabella's hands trembled as she read. He's claiming you seduced me just to ruin his business. This is insane." David only smiled for the first time in days. "Why are you smiling?" she asked. "Because he finally made a real mistake. By suing me, Richard just opened the door for discovery. That means I can legally demand his financial records. He thinks he's cornering me, but he just walked into his own trap." That night, David called Agent Washington. "Mr. Carter," the agent answered, "you told me men like Blackwood don't stop. You were right. Now I have something your department might find useful: photographic proof of bribery, plus documents showing money laundering tied to city contracts." There was silence on the line, heavy with meaning. Then Washington spoke. "Mr. Carter, bring everything to my office tomorrow morning." After the call, David sat on the porch with Isabella under the clear night sky. For the first time in weeks, there was hope in the air. "Do you think this will really work?" she asked softly. David looked at his modest workshop, the life he had built with stubborn honesty. Richard made the same mistake all predators make. He assumed I was easy prey. "And aren't you?" she teased nervously. David smiled, remembering his father's words. Sometimes the prey learns how to hunt. The next morning, David woke with an unusual calm. Today, he would begin to strike back. What he didn't know was that Richard Blackwood had spent the entire night plotting his final escalation. Tuesday afternoon, David's prediction came true. The sound of footsteps echoed in the garage, heavier this time. Richard appeared again, but gone were the polished lawyers and smug henchmen. In their place, two hardened men stood at his side, the kind who didn't bother hiding what they were. Richard's mask of charm finally slipped. His voice was stripped of pretense. 48 hours, Carter. That's all you've got." "If Isabella isn't in my office by Thursday," Richard sneered, "you'll learn how many accidents happen out here in the suburbs." From beneath the car, David's voice was steady. "I understand the threat perfectly. Thank you for making it so clear." That calmness unsettled Richard. He bristled. "You don't understand who you're messing with, mechanic. I destroy people like you before breakfast." "I'm sure you do." David slid out from under the car, wiping his hands with deliberate ease. Then he tilted his head. "By the way, how was your meeting with the federal prosecutors yesterday?" Richard's smug expression cracked. "What are you talking about?" "Agent Washington works fast," David said evenly, "especially when he receives photographic proof of bribery and money laundering." Richard gave a short, forced laugh. "What evidence?" "You're bluffing." Without a word, David unlocked his phone and held up one of Isabella's photos. Richard, mid-handshake, sliding an envelope toward Councilman Morrison. "Isabella documented everything," David said. "Every bribe, every threat, every scheme." The garage went quiet. Then Richard's phone rang, shattering the silence. He answered, but his voice faltered. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Thomas Rivera with the Tribune-Journal. I'd like your comment on tomorrow's article about municipal corruption." Richard hung up instantly. The phone rang again. "Richard Blackwood, FBI. You need to come with us for questioning about irregularities in city contracts." David watched as the man who had terrorized them for weeks began to crumble. His henchmen had already drifted toward the exit, clearly unwilling to share in their boss's downfall. This is impossible," Richard muttered. "I controlled everything. Her calls, her documents." "You controlled only what I let you see," Isabella said, stepping into the doorway. Her voice was steady now. "I photographed every deal you showed me, and everyone you tried to hide." Richard's eyes flashed with panic and hate. "You have no idea what you've done." "Oh, I think she does," David cut in. "And those expensive lawyers you keep bragging about? They won't be able to help when the IRS freezes your accounts this afternoon." He checked his watch. Agent Washington was very specific about the timing. Right on cue, Richard's phone rang a third time. His secretary's frantic voice spilled through the speaker. "What do you mean frozen accounts? Since when? And the city contracts, they've all been canceled." Richard staggered, his face pale. David stepped closer, his tone calm but final. "Do you know the difference between us, Richard? You assumed I was just another obstacle. but I've spent my life studying men like you, learning patience, documenting everything, and predators like you always make the same mistake." Richard's gaze narrowed. "What mistake?" David's smile was cold. "Thinking you're untouchable, even while threatening federal witnesses." Richard's face drained of color as he realized David's phone had been recording every word of their exchange. And in the next half hour, David and Isabella stood side by side and watched the empire collapse. One call after another came through, business partners pulling out, contracts canceled, investigations launched, accounts frozen. The man who had ruled through fear and money was finally learning that his power had limits, and this time the prey had become the hunter. The man who had walked in with arrogance now sat slumped on the workshop floor, his head in his hands, whispering the same word over and over: impossible. David set a glass of water beside him. "Richard, let me give you some advice. Next time you underestimate someone, remember, some people spend their entire lives learning how to be smarter than their oppressors." When the federal agents finally arrived, Richard Blackwood left in handcuffs. The predator who had once terrorized others now faced the world in disgrace. David stepped out onto the porch and hugged Isabella as the last government vehicles pulled away. The nightmare was finally over, yet in his quiet smile there was a certainty. Richard's downfall had only just begun. The millionaire had thought a suburban mechanic would be easy prey. Instead, he had discovered an opponent he could neither buy, nor intimidate, nor break. And as the sun sank behind the workshop he had nearly lost, David realized that one small act of kindness, stopping to help a desperate woman in a rain-soaked wedding dress, had changed his life forever. 6 months later, David Carter stood in front of his brand-new garage across town. A second location, a second chance. Success had come not by chance, but by resilience. At his side was Isabella, now his wife and co-owner, the one who managed the books with the same precision she once used to document Richard's crimes. They had married in a quiet ceremony with Agent Washington and journalist Thomas Rivera as witnesses. "I never imagined one ride in the middle of the night would change everything," David said as he cut the ribbon, watching the line of customers waiting to be served. The irony was perfect. Richard Blackwood, once untouchable, was serving a 12-year sentence for corruption and intimidation. His assets were seized, his political allies gone. The man who had despised ordinary people now depended on public defenders. Detective Morrison, the officer who once led the sham investigation, came to the opening to apologize publicly. "David," he said, "you proved that dignity isn't measured by wealth. It's measured by character." Agent Washington became not just an ally, but a family friend. At the celebratory barbecue, he laughed while recounting, "You know, Richard even tried to bribe me from jail, offered me 50 grand to make the evidence disappear." David chuckled, wrapping an arm around Isabella. "Some men never learn that there are things money can't buy." Richard had lost everything by underestimating those he considered beneath him. David had gained everything by holding on to dignity, patience, and strategic intelligence. His father's words echoed as he looked around at the thriving new shop, his community standing proudly by his side. The best revenge isn't lowering yourself to their level. It's building something they can never destroy. Richard had tried to break a man who already knew how to rebuild, and in his arrogance, he had fallen into the trap of his own making. The real victory wasn't just Richard's imprisonment. It was the family David and Isabella had built, the respect they had earned, and the proof they had given others, that courage and integrity will always outlast arrogance and intimidation. That night, as they locked up the new shop, Isabella asked softly, "Do you ever regret stopping that morning?" David smiled, remembering the rain, the desperate bride, and the moment everything changed. "Never. Sometimes the detours are exactly what lead us where we're meant to be." David and Isabella's story is proof. You can't buy respect, you can't fake dignity, and you can't intimidate true strength. Richard Blackwood learned that the hard way. And if this story of justice and resilience inspired you, Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that prove the best revenge is success built with honesty and heart.